Introducing an innovative and sustainable way to begin your journey. Soon getting here will be as easy as getting there.
Well, good morning. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and if you are joining us online, we appreciate that. I am here with JoeBen Bevirt, the CEO and founder of Joby Aviation, and Pam Fletcher, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Delta. And before we start, just a housekeeping. If you want to submit questions, we will take some questions at the end. You can do that in the Go app, or when we get to the end, you're welcome to line up at the microphones. It might be easier to submit them. It's totally up to you. They told me to tell you to go to the Go app and tap Engage. You can ask questions. We'd love to have some questions. So, JoeBen, I think the best place to, I saw people taking pictures. I think you're the celebrity here. That's pretty exciting for me. But I think the best thing to do is to start by talking about Joby, which is building an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. I think I got that right. There's a lot to unpack there, but can you start by just telling us what is this thing that you're making? I've seen photos and videos, but I'd love to hear directly from you what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great to be here. Wonderful to see all of you. And this is a culmination of a lifelong dream. This is something that I've been thinking about since I was a kid, growing up amongst the redwoods on the Pacific coast. And it was a better way to get from home to school and back again, a way that blended in with the environment. It's a key theme that we'll be talking about today is sustainability and sustainability with air transportation. But the goal is to build an aircraft which is dramatically quieter than what's been possible before, but one that can also take off and land vertically, that can, over time, replace more and more of the trips that we take on the ground. And so that's the inspiration. And we've been working on this. This is really fundamentally unlocked by electric propulsion. And we can touch more on that. But it's a fundamental shift in our mode of transportation. It's something many of us have been dreaming about for many years, and it's a societal dream, and the exciting piece is that it's coming true, and it's coming true very soon. There's many companies around the world that are developing these kinds of technologies, and we're incredibly pleased to be partnered with Delta, the world's leading global airline, to bring this to Delta customers in a very short period of time here.
So just to clarify, the thing we see on the screen right now is the aircraft. Do you just, what is it called? Like, is it the Joby? What do we call this thing?
So this is our internal name for it is the S4, and it carries a pilot and 4 passengers. Again, it takes off and lands vertically. It can fly at speeds of over 200 miles an hour, and but the real key piece is the journeys that this unlocks and being able to effortlessly fly over traffic.
Yeah, there's a reason I write about these things instead of naming them. The S4 is a much better name than I was trying to give it. But Pam, I want to just turn to you for a second because you joined Delta a little over a year ago. Before that, you were at General Motors. It's very nice to be sitting up here with another Michigander. You understand how cold it was when I left home yesterday. I want to ask you why, like, what was it that motivated you to come to Delta? Because if you think about it, like, you've chosen basically the 2 most complicated industries that I can think of to decarbonize, right? Automotive and then airlines. But Delta has been doing a lot in this area. In fact, you guys have a video we're going to watch here real quick, and then I want to ask some questions because you guys have been doing a lot. So let's watch this video first.
No one sees the world quite like an airline. But the world we see below us every day is changing fast. That's why Delta has already committed $1 billion toward reducing our carbon footprint. It's why we're working with Airbus to create the future of aviation with the world's first hydrogen-powered airplane, and switching ground vehicle after ground vehicle to electric. It's why we're accelerating our push to source sustainable aviation fuel. And it's why we're also getting rid of 4.9 million pounds of single-use plastics annually. That's just what we're doing. But it'll take more than just the 85,000 of us at Delta. It'll take everyone at every airline and in every industry. Because we know a thing or two about getting where we need to be. And it's time we all got going together.
And I don't want to undersell the work that you had done at General Motors. That, really the bolt and the volt are the reason that there's people understand that electric vehicles can be a thing that people will buy, right? And what was it about Delta that made you say, okay, I got General Motors to pledge to electrify the entire fleet. Let's go do this to an airline. Like, talk about what drove you to want to be a part of Delta.
Well, it took me a lot of years to figure out that I have a tendency to run to hard problems, but it's also very rewarding when you do that. The auto industry, I think, is in a great position now. Electrification has become the business model. We have more and more entries of vehicles that are out there, and I would argue that by the end of the year, it's going to be tremendously more than even you see today. But in speaking with Delta, number one, just the strength of the brand, the internal culture of the company is nothing short of amazing, where it is very people-focused, employee-focused. So those employees treat our customer with the best experiences that they deserve. And, that's a great foundation to build anything off of. And it's just an opportunity. Now is the time. There is some ambiguity to the ultimate solutions for long-haul aviation. However, now's the time. We have created I could talk a little about our sustainability strategy if you want.
Yeah, so 3 years ago, your boss, Ed Bastian, pledged that Delta would spend $1 billion by 2030 to work towards becoming the first carbon net zero airline in the world, right? And so we're 3 years in. A lot has happened in the last 3 years, but I would love to hear specifically what are some of the things that Delta has been doing to move towards that goal over the last 3 years.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So just let's talk about progress for a second, because that's always the most motivating thing to me. So we have already implemented new products on board, which allowed us to eliminate almost 5 million pounds of single-use plastics per year from our aircraft. We are electrifying our ground fleet. So when you're on the plane and you're looking out the window, we are starting to electrify the equipment that it takes to, we call it turn the plane, from getting it to the gate, getting it serviced, and getting it back out of the gate. We're 25% there. But we have about 2 of our hubs that are at 100%, Boston and Salt Lake City. So if you go to those locations, take a look. In fact, we're getting ready to do some branding with them because you might not know they're electric, but they are. And we have an internal organization called the Carbon Council, which is laser focused on reducing our emissions from flying, which equates mostly to reducing our fuel consumption. And that's a cross-functional leadership group that has already saved over 10 million gallons from our operations last year. And we're going to do another 10 and another 10, compounding by 2035 into 1 billion gallons of fuel savings across our fleet. So lots of progress and focus to date.
Now, the two of you were at CES just back in January, and we're on stage together talking about a very similar, basically the same kind of thing. And I want to kind of dive into the partnership. I did want to ask Pam first, another thing that Delta did at CES was sort of launch this Sustainable Skies Lab. Talk about that.
Yeah, I'll go back to, you mentioned the $1 billion before, and we are still solidly behind the $1 billion commitment, and that was over a decade, so 2020 to I guess 2029 to be precise. So over the course of the decade, we're solidly there. That funds a lot of what I just described, but even more. And we are really taking that to get laser focused on two pillars. One is to eliminate our climate impact from flying, and that's a big statement. The other to embed sustainability in everything we do, and we have so many opportunities to make progress now. And I'll go back to the Delta culture, where it was really important that we have a strategy that every one of our 85,000 plus Delta people can see themselves in it and know that they have a voice and can play a role in making progress. When we think about eliminating our climate impact from flying, that's a hard problem. But I'm optimistic. I mean, I've seen the journey before on electrification. I was part of the journey on autonomy. I am very optimistic that we will get where we need to be. And the reason just last week we published our strategy is because I'm a big believer that you need to tell people what's important to you. You need to tell people what your intentions are. And so that's what we came out with. And so when we talk about eliminating our climate impact from flying, as an airline, Delta's not going to solve that alone. We need, powerful partnerships, with amazing leaders and disruptors. We need powerful coalitions, because in some cases we have to bring an entire ecosystem together. And so that is how we're going to manage our way through eliminating our climate impact. So finally, getting to your question, the Delta Sustainable Skies Lab, which JoeBen and I were actually on stage at CES earlier this year, that is a place for great ideas to get nurtured, fed, and hopefully someday scaled. And so the idea is, at Delta today, we have many projects, innovations happening across the company that will improve our sustainability and continue to make progress. And so we want to showcase those. We just got to do it today, which is great, but we need to showcase that. And the reason we want to showcase it is it will inspire people to come forward with the next great idea. It will inspire, hopefully, people external to Delta with great ideas to bring them forward. And if we agree that it's a great idea, let me tell you, Delta is your partner of choice, because we bring to bear the best that we have. We bring together not only our people and their know-how, our world-class operations, our world-class tech ops, our world-class global network. And so the lab is really a place to accelerate innovation on our sustainability journey.
So you talked about a partnership. I want to dive into that, because that's kind of the exciting part, and it's the part that will that consumers and travelers are going to experience in a couple of years. And JoeBen, talk about the partnership. Delta has invested $60 million into Joby. What does that do for your vision and for the company and for the S4?
Yeah, thank you so much. And this partnership with Delta, again, Delta being the world's leading global airline, is absolutely fantastic for Joby. The capital is valuable, but even more important is Delta's relationships and Delta's customers. So the relationships with the cities around the country, and being able to develop infrastructure which is really convenient. Being able to stitch our air taxi flights in and around cities seamlessly with your Delta journey. And that's the piece that is so exciting, being able to deliver this elevated customer experience to Delta customers, integrating that into the workflow and into the booking flow when you're booking a Delta ticket, and having that integrated with the Joby app when you're flying, getting your air taxi ticket.
Okay, so you said two things that I want to unpack there. You talked about the infrastructure, and then you talked about sort of the order flow or the experience of actually the customer journey experience. We'll get to that in a second. Talk about the infrastructure, because I fly into a lot of airports. I know that they make sense to someone, but they don't usually make sense to me. And I travel a lot, right, on Delta. You're welcome.
We appreciate that very
much. I fly to
much.
LaGuardia every month, so.
We built that new terminal just
I love
for you.
it, and the Sky Club is amazing, and all of it. Yeah, if you could just build something to go from the 80s, so I don't have to walk 6 miles to get. Anyway, other problems. Not about me.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
There you go. So I'll get to that in a second, but I do want to talk about the infrastructure piece, because that is obviously a thing that a company like Joby is not going to be able to go to LaGuardia or JFK and be like, hey, we want to land stuff here. That's cool, right? But with a partnership with a company like Delta, that obviously opens a lot of doors. So like, what are the challenges in the infrastructure that need to take place before people are going to, we'll talk about the FAA and the certification in a minute, but just the hard infrastructure. Like, what does this mean?
That's exactly right. It's about those relationships with the Port Authority for LaGuardia and JFK, with LAWA at LAX, and with other airport operators around the country, and those relationships that Delta has, and really going deep there and planning infrastructure which makes this new mode of transportation especially compelling.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just talk about infrastructure a bit. So airports are a complicated place. There's a lot of people that have a say in that. However, I would talk about over the course of just the last few years, we have invested another $1 billion+. It's not the same billion I talked about before, to essentially rebuild the terminal in LaGuardia. We're doing the same at JFK. We have done the same at LAX, and we've already been public talking about New York and Los Angeles being our initial target markets. So we've already made a big infrastructure commitment there, and this is, so what a terrific foundation now to bring this new elevated experience that's going to be just game changing for many of our customers. And as JoeBen was saying, the idea is to get a completely seamless experience, seamless in the booking, seamless in the operation, how you transition from your Delta flight to Joby or back. And that's all the work that we're doing together today. You know, I'll just highlight, Delta has a history of doing this. I don't know if many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Clear that's in the airport. That was actually a startup, and Delta identified that and made a very early investment and got them into the airports. And I don't know about you all, but I use it every time I fly, every airport that has it. But that's just an example of where partnerships can be powerful and accelerate commercial opportunities.
And I think that, you know, Clear is a great example of something that can save customers time delivering an elevated experience. If you can get from Manhattan to the terminal in 5 minutes, that's an elevated experience. If you can do it at a price point which is accessible, that's an elevated experience. And again, sustainability is at the core of all of this, and it's a really exciting opportunity.
So yeah, let's talk about the kind of customer experience piece of it for a minute. I fly, flying to LaGuardia is great. I love flying to LaGuardia. It's, going to Midtown that's the problem from LaGuardia still. So, and that's at this point still the traditional, you can take the bus to the subway, you can take a Uber or a Lyft, you can have someone come and pick you up if you have some really good friends who are willing to do that for you. But now, like, this is another way that changes that equation, and you can take Joby. Well, is the goal that at some point, like, I'll book my flight from Grand Rapids, Michigan to LaGuardia, and I'll say, also, I'd like an air taxi? Like, that's the goal? How do we get to that?
That's exactly the work we're doing together. We have multiple joint work streams. I mean, our teams work as one, and we're sorting through all of those details because the details matter. You all expect a seamless experience. We want it to be seamless. We have a tremendous opportunity to solve for not only a new mode of transportation, but something that makes the experience even better. And just to build on that a little bit, I could list a whole host of examples of partnerships that we've done. And, as we go forward, this is a demonstration where sustainability becomes part of the equation and frankly builds toward a better experience. And so that's how we see these things playing together, ultimately over time. I used to sell electric vehicles on the notion of that liquid acceleration, no shifting, no engine revving, the kick in the pants you get when you first step on the accelerator. And JoeBen and his team have performed a miracle with this very quiet noise signature of the S4 aircraft. And so all these things just play together and make an experience that some of us would never have, dreamed of not that many years ago.
And let me just touch on that a little bit. the kick in the pants that Pam just talked about, that's what makes it possible to build an aircraft that can take off and land vertically. The incredibly high both specific power, that is power per unit of mass, and specific torque, which is the torque per unit of mass, are what make it possible to build a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. The power is what's needed to take off, but the torque is what's needed in order to make it quiet. We spin our propellers at very low tip speeds, which is what enables that quiet acoustic signature. We're more than 100 times quieter than a helicopter. And it's also the character of the noise. Instead of the wop wop of a helicopter that travels long distances through the atmosphere, that penetrates buildings and we find really annoying, it's more of a white noise like the wind in the trees. And we think that this is pivotal to having communities welcome our aircraft in, and in order to site takeoff and landing infrastructure where our customers want to go. So again, electric propulsion is the critical unlock that's making this transformation possible. It also makes it sustainable.
So one of the things that both of you have sort of touched on that I think is actually really interesting and worth just kind of pulling on this thread for a minute is that this is both about sustainability. We should not discount that, but really it's like a better customer experience that's also sustainable. And it feels like that should be a very good business model, right? Like, let's do things that are sustainable and also people like it, right? At this point, though, the S4 is, you mentioned, 1 pilot and 4 passengers. What are the challenges to making that scale, right? Because there are only so many, flight slots to do this kind of thing. Will this be a thing that everybody will do? Is this going to be sort of like it's really just for people who might have taken a blade or something to JFK? I'm just curious, like, how do you make this scale beyond just 4 people and a pilot?
It's a fantastic question. So, and it's one of the areas where the FAA is really leaning in, is thinking about how do we move. So today we're piloted, and it works within the existing air traffic control infrastructure, and that means that we can deploy hundreds of these aircraft in a given geography. But what the FAA is working on, the FAA does both the regulation, the certification of the aircraft, but they're also responsible for air traffic control. And on the air traffic control side, they're doing a lot of innovative work to look at how do we increase the density of operations. And the work they're doing on that front is really leading the world into this next stage where air travel becomes part of our daily lives.
Okay, part of our daily lives. Air travel is, for a lot of people, part of their daily life, maybe part of their regular life. It's not a foreign thing. I think that the S4 is cool, but it is certainly not a part of anyone's daily life at this point. And part of the reason for that is that the process to build this takes time, but the process to get the FAA to say, yes, you can put people in it takes a very long time. Joby recently announced that you have passed the second of, I think, 5 phases of this sort of certification process. I'm using all the wrong words. He's going to fix it in a second. But talked about that process, what you recently accomplished, and just sort of the challenges, because I think it's worth people knowing it's not easy to do this, and it shouldn't be easy because you're going to put humans inside of this thing and it's going to go in the air and fly. It's a little bit higher stakes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I find especially exciting about air transportation is and one of the things that's driven its success is it's not only our fastest and lowest cost mode of transportation, it's also our safest mode of transportation. So it's like 4 orders of magnitude safer than driving per passenger mile. That's like 100 or 10,000 times safer. So it's really, really safe. And one of the elements that makes that possible is the focus on safety that both industry, companies like Delta, and the FAA have worked on over the last 100 years to deliver that safety. And that has resulted in a very rigorous certification process. And there are a lot of new entrants who feel like it's too onerous, but it's actually the foundation of the safety of our air traffic, our air transportation system. And as you talked about, we've been working with the FAA on certifying our aircraft since 2018. In 2020, we became the first company to receive our G1, which is basically an agreement with the FAA on the high-level rules that we're going to use to certify our aircraft. And then we've recently completed Stage 2, which is all of the means of compliance. And we're making fantastic progress on Stage 3, which is our area-specific certification plans. And then Stage 4 of the 5 stages is the testing. And we've begun the really rigorous testing work. And then finally is the documentation of all of those test results, where the FAA signs off and says that we've done everything we need. There are 2 other pieces aside from type certification that are required. There's the production certification. So this is certifying that every step in our production process follows our quality control processes and standards. And then the last piece is the operating certificate. And so we've applied for and now been granted our Part 135 operating certificate, which gives us the ability to operate our air taxis. And and there's a couple other pieces. There's the pilot training, and then there's the maintenance processes. All of those get wrapped up into our safety system, and that's what delivers the really incredible levels of safety. Is the rigor that goes into each and every aspect of both designing, building, and operating an airline.
And in listening to you talk about that, I think a lot of times, just as I don't build, I write words, I don't build things. So I don't have a very good picture of, like, I'm just like worried about my flight later so I can get home because my daughter has like high school soccer tryouts and I want to know how she did. Like, I can't think past that. We have 4 kids. But like Delta is thinking about 10 and 20 years down the road. You know, the goal is by 2050 to be completely net zero for carbon emissions. Building airplanes takes a long time. Certifying them takes a long time. And I think the lesson that like I'm becoming more aware of is that the innovation is not an overnight thing, right? And in some cases, when you're flying through the air, it shouldn't be. It takes a very long time. I guess for both of you, I'm curious, like the goal is to have passengers be able to book and use this service in 2025. Like that's not that far away, but again, I'm just thinking about this afternoon. Why are we talking about it now? Like, I'm just curious, like what are the messages that you want people to know now? Because no one can go home and book a Delta flight and a Joby flight at the same time now. So like, talk to us about like why we want to talk about this 2 years in advance.
This is a journey, and ultimately we want to bring everyone along on the journey with us. And we're designing something all new. I mean, JoeBen and his team have already designed the aircraft that you see in the videos. It's flying. I've been out there and personally seen it fly, so a tremendous amount of work. And now we're inventing an all-new experience. And how do you really operationalize that? And so getting out to a multitude of audiences, diverse sets of audiences and people to talk about what we're doing, bring them along on the journey, frankly, get some input and feedback is very valuable, because in the end, this is something that comes to not only individuals as consumers, but it comes to communities, it comes to regions that have to make decisions about infrastructure. It becomes part of the fabric of where we live, work, and operate. So that's why we think it's important to get out there now and speak about it.
And as I talked about, the infrastructure is really critically important. So we have to engage with communities, as Pam talked about, and get communities to pull and say, we want a vertiport in our community. We want access to an air taxi. And the more takeoff and landing locations we have, the more convenient it becomes, the more savings that we can provide to all of you. And so that is the real critical piece now as this industry gets matured is to deliver that infrastructure so that we can the ecosystem becomes especially compelling. So that's infrastructure at airports, which is why the partnership with Delta is so crucial. But it's also infrastructure in your neighborhoods.
And there was one other piece of it that feels like maybe this is just obvious to me, but as cool as that thing is, it's going to take some time for people to feel comfortable getting into something that's totally new, right? I know a lot of people who probably would never get in a helicopter. They'll fly on an airplane, but it's a totally different experience. And flying to the airport in the same way as getting into an SUV to drive to the airport is going to be a very foreign experience for people. And I wonder if you can just talk about that building awareness and normalizing, because really the key to a lot of the plans for the future do involve normalizing these alternative things.
I just want to give an example for a second. So back a few years ago, I became responsible for autonomous technology in vehicles. And it was at a much earlier stage at that point. And somebody described me in words like how it worked. And I'm thinking, who would want that? But we geared up. We got everybody revved up to get through the technical unlocks, get through all the safety testing we needed to do, et cetera. But I want to tell you, the first time I was out with the team on a development ride, and I let go of that wheel, that steering wheel, all these things happen that you can't put in words. And I couldn't imagine ever not having it after that. And so it was kind of like trying to explain to people what it was like to drive an electric vehicle. They just couldn't get it. Everybody assumed it was going to be like a golf cart. With, some of the driver assistance systems that are out there today, people don't get it. But I'll tell you what happens. I remember distinctly going back to the work the first day after an extended vacation. And, you got both hands on the wheel. I'm trying to go from 94 to 696 on the big interchange. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have Super Cruise. And you let go of the wheel, your shoulders relax, you lean back, you're looking around, taking in the scenery, and it's like, this is how it should be. And so I just say that because it's all about the experience. And so the more exposure we can get people, I think they're going to be amazed at just how incredible it is to how they feel, what they do, what they're able to do with the time they now have that they may not have had before.
That's exactly right. It's all about the experience, and it's not just the experience of saving time, taking a 1-hour journey and turning it into a 5-minute flight, but it's also about the experience of that flight, the perspective that you have. And I think this is one of the pieces that, as an engineer or as somebody who's all about efficiency and saving time, underappreciated at the beginning of this journey, was how profound it is to be able to fly over our civilization and to see everything from the air. We are so locked into our 2D existence of driving along on roads and being confined by the traffic and the folks that are sitting in front of us. But when you rise up above it and you get to see the beauty of the world, it's really profound, and it puts a new perspective on every day. And I think that's one of the pieces that I'm coming to understand is what a significant impact that's going to have on the quality of people's daily lives, is giving them, on your commute to work in the morning, being able to see the world, to watch the sunrise from a new perspective. I think that's really profound, and it's really exciting.
Pam, you said something, and it made me chuckle a little bit. We have an electric vehicle. I fly Delta, but I don't have a GM electric vehicle, so I'm 1 for 2. I'm sorry.
You made a nice comment at the beginning, so I'll take it.
Okay, but I will say I've driven a lot of electric vehicles, and Super Cruise is by far the best. I will say, it's a good job. But part of that, I think, is honestly the branding of it is so much better than companies that might tell you that their vehicles are full self-driving or whatever. I'm not naming any names, but obviously nobody's car is full self-driving at this point. But Super Cruise is like cruise control but better, right? You can take your hands off the wheel and it'll keep you in your lane and it'll do this kind of thing. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's about expectations and how you set those expectations for people. And I wonder if JoeBen, if you can just talk about like how people should be thinking about this in terms of, there was a question that that was on here. It talked about like, do you see this as being just a thing people are going to take to the airport, or that it might become a mainstream part of public transportation, not just from LA to LAX, but from Chicago to South Bend, Indiana, for like just to avoid. Trust me, you don't want to drive on that road. So like, is that where we're headed?
That's exactly where we're headed. So, and that's precisely the progression. So one of the reasons, that we are partnered with Delta and so excited about this is that those routes to the airport are very heavily traveled. And there's a lot of people who are moving in both directions on those routes. And so as we launch the service, those are the routes that we can provide at the most compelling price points. Over time, as more and more ground infrastructure gets built out, as our network gets denser, we're able to provide that service on more and more trips with that have lighter density, because there's a larger percentage of the people who are using the service. And so there's these really exciting network effects that allow us to scale over time. But initially, today we have a manufacturing facility that has capacity to build tens of aircraft per year. We are working on selecting a site to break ground on a facility to build hundreds per year. But in order for this to have really widespread impact and to have a significant number of people who are using it as a daily mode of transportation, we need millions of these aircraft. And so there's a long progression, and it's going to take time to build from tens of aircraft per year to millions of aircraft per year. If you think about it, there's 100 million cars produced a year. That's a really significant number, and if we're going to replace a significant number of car trips, that's the scale of challenge that lies before us, and it's bigger than aviation has ever been in terms of a volume perspective. Not in terms of passenger miles traveled, because aviation, one of the exciting things about aviation, because it's the safest, fastest, and lowest cost mode of transportation, demand for air travel has doubled every decade for 70 years. And that trend shows no sign of abating. And we are, again, really excited about being able to bring the speed and the convenience of flight to people's daily lives.
And I would just remind everybody, where things start isn't where they end. And so we think we can create a great experience right at the beginning to serve a very high demand need, where people just don't want to deal with repetitive trips to and from the airport in extremely congested areas. But as you can imagine, over time, that experience grows in terms of capability. I see questions about range. So grow in terms of capability of the aircraft itself, in terms of the experiences that can be offered, the accessibility to different communities. And so this is a journey, but it's going to start in a really exciting place. And I don't know that our imaginations can even take us as far as this has the potential to go.
Okay, Pam, I want to give you a chance, because Delta's a big company, but $60 million is real money, even for a big company. I think I want to ask a question on behalf of our audience, because I think there's a tendency to listen to this or to look at this type of thing and think this is really cool, but is this just an effort for Delta to say, see, we're doing sustainability things, because that's the thing that every company has to say right now. But in the long term, maybe people will forget in 6 or 7 years, and we'll move on to something else. And I've heard you talk about it. I've heard Delta talk about it. And I you're doing this stuff, but I want to give you the chance to explain to the audience, this is not just a $60 million marketing thing to get some good, sustainability vibes, right? Delta hired a chief sustainability officer to do this. So I want to give you that opportunity to kind of, when we leave here, not to think, God, this is really cool, but it's never going to happen.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. You characterized it well earlier. This is about an elevated customer experience. but also demonstrates that going forward, Delta puts sustainability in the consideration set. And so I would say Delta and Joby, we chose each other. We're not a partnership of accident or convenience. We chose each other because of the potential for the elevated experience, this noise signature that no one else has, and beyond. We have other partnerships to get at other parts of our business. And so we're demonstrating this over and over again. And so the list is long, but just to mention a few, our primary business is long-haul flight. And that's not ultimately what this particular experience we're talking about with Joby is, but it's an important one. So we are out there partnering with Airbus on their Zero E program, which is looking at how do we get to hydrogen-powered flights. And why we really love that partnership is because it is looking beyond just the aircraft itself or the engines itself. It's looking at what has to happen in the airports, what has to happen in terms of fuel creation and transportation, and all of the things, I say all the things that must be true in order for it to be successful. And so that's something that we are doing. We work with academics. So there's a phenomena out there, I'm not going to try to explain in detail, but a phenomena out there that many say contributes to global warming called contrails. And I don't want you to think that every white plume you see behind a plane is a contrail that's problematic. Some claim about 10% of those are. And we're leaning in. I mean, there are heated climate debates on does it matter, doesn't it matter? But Delta's leaning in. We're working with the leading researchers at MIT. We've already flown, I believe, 100 or more test flights with MIT to continue to refine the science. And that's one where we're, again, we're not going to argue about the science. We're going to try to advance it. And let's get the details sorted out. Let's understand the impact. And let's understand how we could mitigate that impact. And so 2 very broad examples of things we're doing and many in between. I mean, I could talk about our Lyft partnership. I could talk about our Starbucks partnership. I could talk about our Wheels Up partnership. I could talk about Someone Somewhere, which is an amazing company in Mexico that has elevated women and women-owned businesses in a small town in Mexico by providing these new amenity kits we have that alone take out 90,000 pounds of single-use plastics in our plane. So we have partnerships all over focused on the customer experience, and with sustainability in the consideration set.
And so I wanted to just touch on one piece that Pam mentioned, which is around she mentioned hydrogen and the work they're doing with Airbus there. Today our planes are battery electric, and battery electric is the most efficient way for short distance trips. But today, so call that our average trip might be a 25-mile trip. Our aircraft has a range of roughly 100 miles, and that's off to today's batteries, which have a specific energy of about 300 watt-hours a kilogram. You compare that to jet fuel at about 12,000 watt-hours a kilogram, and hydrogen at 35,000 watt-hours a kilogram. So hydrogen has more than 100 times the specific energy of today's batteries. And you can make hydrogen from wind and solar, and they call that green hydrogen. If you take that hydrogen and you run it through a fuel cell, you generate electricity. We call that hydrogen electric. And so you can replace your battery with a liquid hydrogen tank plus a fuel cell, and you can generate electricity to propel electric motors, and you can deliver a sustainable and very efficient mode of propelling aircraft. And this has the potential to deliver both medium and long-haul flights in a sustainable way. And we think this is really exciting. But as we talked about before, aviation and the development of new aircraft takes time. Those aircraft are then in production for decades, and then they're in service for decades more. And so it's imperative that companies in the aviation space like Delta are forward investing and leaning into new technologies. And so part of the partnership with Delta is about leaning in on the next generation of aviation propulsion.
So we got a lot of questions, and I want to make sure we get to some of them, and I see that we have some in the room. Before we get to the ones in the room, I do want to ask one of these, which I think is a fair question. Catherine asks, like, will this just allow the 1% to leave the rest of us on the ground, stuck on crumbling trains and highways? And I think that that's a fair question for people to ask. So
it's a fantastic question, and it's core to our mission and what we care about at Joby. Which is making sure that this is a new mode of transportation which is broadly accessible. And in order to do that, it's important for us to price it at a price point where everyone thinks it's something that they can access. And so as we roll out the service, that's what you can expect is as an accessible price point. And many people, are shocked by this, but one of the things that you can think about is when you take an Uber or a taxi, the average speed might be 10 or 20 miles an hour. And so it takes that driver a long time to move you on a given length trip. But when you're flying, a pilot's flying 4 passengers at 200 miles an hour, they're much more productive. And so, with a taxi or an Uber, or a Lyft, the percentage of the cost of the trip is dominated by the cost of the driver.
Okay. So I want to make sure that we get some of the ones that are in the room. Would you tell us who you are, and then make sure you tell us who the question's for, and give us your question?
Sure. So my name's Nishan Marks. I'm the Director of Advanced Mobility at the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky Airport. So big fan of Delta, and hopefully we're making your experience at all times in airports a little bit better. With that, I've gotten to fly the Joby simulator at Springfield, Ohio, where we do a lot of work around advanced air mobility with NASA and the National Campaign. One of the things, and it kind of goes to the question beforehand, a lot of what we talk about is, yes, I don't like driving. I cannot wait to be able to fly or be in an autonomous vehicle, to be able to get to my flight faster. But we talk a lot about getting to jobs. At the airport, we have over 15,000, 16,000 jobs, and we're always hiring more. So how can we get people maybe from GA airports out in rural communities into jobs? So my question, they're kind of 2-point, and I like that you're smiling. So one is, how do you foresee a lot of that more access to jobs in those milk runs from maybe communities that don't have hot pockets for job opportunities or to be able to get to those work beds? But then also, what about the role of GA airports? Since there are so many, especially in the Midwest, that are there being funded by the FAA, but not really put into use as much as they probably could.
Yeah, I think both of those are fantastic questions. One of the pieces that is so exciting about this technology, because you're flying at 200 miles an hour, it spreads the range. And there's this thing called Marchetti's constant. It was this Italian physicist who studied transportation. And what he found is that with each transportation revolution, it spread our accessible daily sphere of influence. And so it allows you to have more opportunities. And so I think this is exactly what you're talking about, is how do you take and connect these rural communities to job centers. And so because of the higher speed of our aircraft, just like as we moved from walking and then to biking and then to trams and then to cars, every time we increase the speed of our transportation, it provides us with a larger sphere of influence that we're able to access. And so we think that's a fantastic opportunity. And then you mentioned all these GA airports. We think that as we add hundreds and then thousands of new aircraft to our communities, that these airports are going to be vital infrastructure for servicing and operating these aircraft.
Thank you. I want to ask this question that Antonio asked, because I think this is a common concern that people have when they talk about electrical. And you've already talked about hydrogen, both of you, but I want to make sure that we address this. Antonio asked, in the USA, much of the electricity is generated through thermal power plants, which burn coal. How do you see a sustainable future to supply electricity? If, like, are we just transferring where the carbon is being emitted from one place to the other?
Can I just that's not just an aviation question or a Joby question. I mean, that applies to so many industries and needs across the world. So big question and an important one for sure, Antonio, that I think everybody is reliant on for the transition that we're all talking about.
And I would just say that Joby has committed to sourcing 100% of electricity from renewable sources. And so we're, when we're talking to a utility, we're saying, how do you put this generation on? How do you put this wind and solar on to ensure that everything that we're using to charge our planes is coming from, and so this is a way in which we're driving the change that needs to happen.
Great. We have another question in the room.
Yes, my name is Deborah Yao, and I'm the editor of an artificial intelligence website called AIbusiness.com. And my question is, I have two questions actually. One is practical. So you're saying that by 2025 you'll start flying this aircraft and be integrated into Delta. So just practicalities. Can you give me a better sense of how much it would be, and also where you're going to land? People still have to drive to these planes, so where do you land? And the second part is, what motivated you to start this air taxi business?
Thank you. So the goal is to launch at similar prices to taxis. You can think of, in the case of New York, using one of the existing helipads around Manhattan and flying from there to LaGuardia or JFK.
Okay.
And then in terms of, again, childhood inspiration, worked on it when I was in college. At that point in time, batteries weren't ready. We had batteries at about 40 watt hours a kilogram, specific energy. Batteries have been improving for about 100 years at 6% a year. Here we are 30 years later, and we've got 300 watt hour a kilogram batteries, which gives us the energy to deliver meaningful trips for our customers in terms of range.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. We have another question.
Hi, my name is Andre. I'm a freshman at the University of Texas. I study aerospace and business. I actually have two questions. One just came up after that previous question, but my first question is that as an engineer, I think about things very ground level, and then I build up, right? And so logistically, I might be saying that quote wrong, but I think Elon said that designing a car or designing a rocket is easy, but bringing it to mass production is really, really hard, especially when you're dealing with, you have to make these Joby planes in bulk, right? So how do you hedge that and make sure that this technology actually realizes its full potential and doesn't just end up in the pile of discarded good ideas? And my second question is, jumping off from the previous one, is that if it's similar price point to taxis in New York, I know when Uber was entering the New York market, they were fighting tooth and nail against the taxi unions. How are you planning to disrupt that market and make sure that they're not coming in slashing your tires or something like that?
Which seems like a really bad thing for an airplane, but yours take off and land vertically, so not as bad. I don't know.
There we go. So on your first question, the key piece is really to touch on there would be our partnership with Toyota. Joby is a very vertically integrated company, and not only do we design it, but we also do much of the manufacturing. So we design almost all the components in the aircraft, and we manufacture almost all the components in the aircraft. And that, if any of you have an opportunity to come visit our manufacturing facilities in California, you'll get to see this firsthand, where we're building all these components. As I mentioned, our partnership with Toyota, Toyota's invested over $400 million. They're one of the most respected automakers in the world for the quality of the cars they build, and they build at large quantities. And as we look to moving this into something that does have a really significant impact on people around the world and their daily transportation. We need to build at scale. And so we're taking the lessons, and even in our pilot plant where we're producing tens per year, we're taking the lessons that Toyota has learned and has deployed with the Toyota production system to industries around the world and learning from that efficiency. And that's being deployed today in our pilot manufacturing facility, and our technicians are getting more and more efficient while increasing the quality of the builds, and we're very grateful for the partnership with Toyota on that front. And then on your second question, again, one of the reasons why we're here today is because it's really important to engage with the communities, with all the constituencies. We're not going to just drop this service and surprise folks. We're going to have those open dialogues and those connections right from the start.
Great. Another
Thanks so
question.
much.
Another question. We have just a couple minutes left.
Sure. I'm Josh Hersheimer. I'm your neighbor in Porsche Consulting right across the runway from Pam and Delta. Leading aerospace and transportation, taking the Porsche operating system, so similar to Toyota production, and helping. My question is a little bit more theoretical, though. You talked about the need for collaboration with the communities and getting that buy-in. How much do you balance innovation versus collaboration with your competitors, both from the Eve and the Archer of the world, or the United and the Americans, because you're going to have to create a mass need and a mass understanding for a global adoption?
Yeah, I think it's great that you bring up that there is a really a vital and growing ecosystem of many companies that are incredibly excited about this new mode of transportation and what it's going to bring to people around the world. I think in order for any of these transformations in transportation to happen, and as we look back through through the centuries, they've all come from an upwelling of where there's a convergence of technologies that it enables something new, and that's what we're seeing today.
Yeah, and JoeBen's being a little bit bashful. One of the reasons that we wanted to partner with Joby is we believe they will be first, incredibly safe, and a great customer solution. And so, I saw this on electric vehicles. I can tell you all the stories about what does the coupler look like it does, and on and on and on. But when you're in that position, you sometimes have to create things that are, surround your product, but aren't directly your product because nobody else has it. And so making some of those decisions that are foundational to its operation and use, when you're in the early stages, you have to do that. Ultimately, as an industry forms, it's all about, this from the auto business, it's all about standards and protocols. And there's things where you need standards so that everybody can operate and you don't have to have duplicate investment. And then there's certain things you compete on. And I would just say that this is, that will come in time, but that time's not exactly right now.
Thank you.
We are basically out of time. I am super sorry, but they told us we had a very hard stop. And I wanted to make sure, maybe this will answer the question. If people want to know more about what Joby is doing, where should they go? What should they do? I don't want to encourage them to just follow you down the streets of Austin. So I'm just wondering, where should we give them some? Well,
First, I'm more than happy to take questions afterwards. And then second, you can check our website. You can follow us on social media.
The website is jobyaviation.com, right? Okay, just
perfect.
To be clear.
Thank you. And again, we're going to be engaging more and more with the communities that we'll be launching in over the months to come, and we're just super grateful for all the support, all the excitement, and we can't wait to for folks to have an opportunity to fly, to have that really transformative experience of seeing the world from the air. We think that just as much as saving time, that experience is going to be something that people relish.
JoeBen, Pam, thank you so much for taking the time and explaining this. I've learned a lot. Hopefully all of you have learned a lot. If you did, would you show them appreciation? And thank you so much.